Welcome everyone to the Adversity to Advantage podcast. I'm very excited all the way across the pond. We've got Matt Pappas. He is a certified coach and NLP practitioner specializing in overcoming anxiety and trauma recovery, which is fascinating to me. And he's also a fellow podcast host and a mental health advocate. Welcome to the show. So good to have you here.
Hey Petra, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. It's an honor.
Thank you so much. So give us a little bit of context to you. What are you passionate about at the moment in work and in life?
Well, as you said, I am a coach. I work with clients one-on-one, and then we have a very unique group coaching program, which we can talk about as well, where we work with clients who are overcoming trauma literally on a daily basis through phone and chats and webinars and such. So that's a pretty cool thing that we've undertaken, myself and a colleague. But for me personally, it's about trying to reach as many people as possible with the message of hope that I didn't have when I was younger, when I was going through all of the crap and all the trauma and trying to figure out what a survivor of trauma was and why I was a survivor and what happened and why it happened and why did I have these struggles all throughout life with learning disabilities and bullying and self-esteem problems and, problems with food and dieting, like all these different things that you don't always realize play a part into past trauma, but they oftentimes do. So learning through all of that and has been eye-opening and very enlightening. So I really just try and spend as much time as I can doing the podcast, working on the blog, working with clients, and just trying to reach as many as possible that being a survivor of trauma isn't a life sentence of misery, of isolation, of being less than what you want to be, of being under the control of the person who traumatized you, or being being in control of your past. So that's a big part of it is, so often we feel like, well, because we've always done this, or we're always doomed to do that, or something always works out this way, or, all these things that we've said all our lives and we've been kind of programmed to think it's what we default to, rather than defaulting to, let me see if I can try this, let me undertake this new thing, let me see how this works, how does this make me feel? I'm worthy of going for that new job, going back to school, finding that relationship, whatever it is, regardless of the fact that maybe my past is telling me I'll fail, it won't work, I'm doomed to repeat old negative mistakes, that kind of stuff. So it's really about empowering people to live free from the past that's been holding them back, keeping them from who they really want to be, and keeping them from reaching out and interacting in the world and living the kind of life they want, really.
Yeah, and we're so aligned on this because that's very much the purpose of my podcast, as we've discussed before, is like, I am the audience, who I was 12 years ago, struggling and suffering and isolating myself and not having the right people or the tools to kind of change the trajectory that my path had put me on, my past had put me on. So there's something so exciting about offering that hope, having come through it. But also, I just learn so much every time I interview somebody, which is great because I just learn so much more, and there's something so fulfilling and exciting about it. So take us way back. Give us a little bit of context to what that was like for you growing up. I mean, did your parents prepare you, or the education system prepare you for sort of the real world?
Well, if you want to go way back to like between 5 and 10, that's when things kind of went south, like quickly. There was a teenager up the street their parents were friends of the family for a long time, which I didn't know at the time, but of course they were. And he was about 10 years older than me. Like I was 5 to 10, he was in his late teens, whatever. And at that point, that's when kind of my whole world changed, when I became the victim of his desires and whims and horrible, nasty abuse. And so that happened multiple times between when I was 5 and 10. And then, so from there, it just kind of unraveled to the point where I became super closed up, didn't talk to anybody, stayed in my room a lot, was very isolated, felt very ashamed, very afraid, very alone most often. I still went out and did things with my friends, but I think mainly as like a coping skill because I just didn't want to talk to my parents. I was afraid to tell them what was going on because he threatened me, and there was, a whole lot of that backstory. But essentially, I just became closed off, didn't talk to my parents. Looking back, they said that sometime around that time I became a very different child, and that, of course, affected me. Going into late middle school and late elementary school, and then into middle school, I was bullied like all the time for anything and everything. I was going to special classes because I had developed a learning disability because my brain would not allow me to think in an abstract way, so I couldn't multitask, couldn't do all kinds of things. So I was kind of a child who was just, I had a handful of friends, so I wasn't completely isolated, but like outside of that little group, I didn't go much, or I didn't go anywhere. I didn't do much as a child. I just kind of stayed at home, and and my parents would try to get me to talk. They tried to send me to a therapist. That didn't work. So it was rough.
You were holding on to everything. You weren't able.
Oh my God! Yeah, I internalized everything. It was all my fault. And then, of course, he had threatened my family dog. He had threatened me. You can't tell anybody.
Yeah.
And so he tried that, multiple tactics of, I'm going to hurt somebody you love, or he tried the, it's our little secret, I'm your best friend kind of thing. And me being a young kid, of course, I bought into it because I didn't know any better.
Of course.
But I internalized it as I must have done something, or I'm broken, or I did it. And my parents being very, very, deeply rooted in the church. So I felt like everything, like it was a very shaming experience. I didn't feel comfortable talking to them. And, I think to their credit, they did want me to talk. They weren't blaming me for something, but I internalized it as my fault based on the way I was groomed, and the experience went down, and the fear of losing my family dog, and the fear of being hurt, and not being cool or fitting in or having friends, all that stuff. So that all kind of really just affected me to the point where I became very isolated, very introverted, or unable to seek out new relationships and friends on anything more than like a superficial level. Wouldn't open up to anybody for a long time. And it wasn't until my second to last year in high school when I finally was able to kind of break free a little bit. But that's not only because I pushed everything aside. I'm like, you know what? This happened, a long time ago. It doesn't bother me anymore. I don't care anymore. I'm tired of dealing with it. So I just went, pushed it aside, and that was it.
Okay.
And so I pretty much pretended like it didn't happen. So that's kind of how I dealt with it.
It feels good for a little while, doesn't it? Being able
it felt great. I mean, it's great because I struggled with my weight and my self-esteem for my whole life. Over one summer, I dropped like 40 pounds. I got like all new clothes, and I went out, and I was trying to find new friends, and I was listening to all the cool music, and I'm like, I'm done being a victim. I don't care anymore. And so I was just like, yeah, this is empowering. This is great. The hell with the past and all this stuff. And so I lived like a child of the 80s. I was like, okay, let's go do this. Let's go listen to music and go to parties and have fun and hang out with my friends, and I don't care about anything. And It served me for a time. I mean, long term it wasn't a solution. But as a teenager just trying to find my way and figure out what the heck was going on with me, I'm like, this works. I suddenly have friends now. I suddenly have a job. People who like me. And so it was cool. And then, of course, for the next 20-some years after that, I was just more of the, I didn't really focus on it much. I didn't think about it much. I just kind of lived my life and went through pretending it didn't happen. I rarely thought about it, didn't care. All the while, the self-esteem was still haunting me. Problems with, relationships, problems with keeping a job, problems with opening up to people, forming anything more, like I said, than like a superficial relationship, going overboard with alcohol, and just all kinds of behaviors that were not healthy. But it's what I dealt with, and all the while I didn't realize it was all being traced back to what happened. And so that's, and then once I started, in my early 40s, I started seeking out the help of a therapist after my marriage had ended in divorce, and I was trying to put my life back together. Not even worrying about the trauma stuff. I was just trying to figure out how to be a single parent and tried to, why did this happen? Why did she leave? What could I have done? How was this my fault? How can I fix myself? And so through that, months and months of therapy for that, it kind of came out that I had been a survivor of childhood trauma. So at that point, then we started diving into that, and then that's what really took off, and I started to put all the pieces in place of working through workbooks and worksheets and writing assignments and where is this feeling coming from and why do I feel this. And so it wasn't until my early 40s until I really started figuring out what happened, why it happened, what it all meant, and how it all kind of ties together.
Wow, so that's quite a few years, quite a number of years of using these coping strategies in some way, like in a good enough way to survive, to show up at life, and at least on the surface, for it to look healthy and together, and like you maybe even were happy.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, like I said, I mean, I pretty much suppressed that trauma for about 30 years.
Yeah.
I just either unintentionally or intentionally, I was not dealing with it. So those coping strategies did serve me for a time. Now they weren't long-term solutions; they weren't healthy necessarily, but I was not ready to go through all the stuff that I went through in my early 40s, back in my 20s, or even my 30s.
And there's very limited education out there about what trauma does to the brain, or how you might cope with it, or how it might show up in later life if it's not dealt with. We don't even know, outside of the profession, how does one deal with trauma? It's just like, get on, get over it, just act as if it didn't happen, all that stuff just to move forward. And if so many people are shrouded by shame, so they're not talking about it, there's not even like a peer support thing to trade on, well, what works for you, you know what I mean? So I completely understand that you just moved forward in your life in some way. And so what were you talk about a divorce. I'm often talking to people about a rock bottom or a crisis point that often leads them to getting the therapy. Like nobody goes, oh, life's great, let me just have some therapy on top of that, right?
Right.
Which we should do sometimes, right?
Yes.
It's usually like crash point, desperation, rock bottom, face in the dirt, going, I've got to do something. What were was it just the divorce, or were there other things that you would ascribe as maybe a rock bottom of some kind that led you to getting help and asking for help?
The divorce was kind of the deciding factor, I guess, because I think when that happened, because it had been my second divorce, so I had this happen a second time.
Right.
So that was kind of the situation where something's got to give right now. And I mean, I was still seeking help, thinking it was my fault. Like, I should have done something better. I didn't give her enough. I could have done more things. Or, I didn't do enough of that. Or, so I was still internalizing it my fault. But between that, understanding that, there was another child here that, we had to kind of work out and be a single parent with again, and all the custody things and the finance and, what do we do with the house and all the stuff that goes into it, I was finally like, all right, I've got to figure out a way to fix myself. So I'm like, okay, it probably wouldn't hurt to go see a therapist. Maybe she can help me. And so, like on my intake form, it was all about the relationship and what I did and why she left and what I could have done and how this was my fault and fix me and all the stuff that I'm sure others have written.
Yeah.
And so I was pretty much just at the bottom of, I'm in a pattern of that's not good, that's not healthy, that's finding me alone again. Clearly there's something wrong. It's probably my fault, but even if it's not, I got to figure out what it is. So it was that, and then of course, everything that comes into play when you get divorced, like I said, with the other issues with family and children and finances and houses and stuff. So
stressful anyway. Right?
Yeah, so it was overwhelming, and I was just like, okay, I'm going to go find a therapist. I'm going to tell her what's happening. Maybe she'll give me a pill. Maybe she'll give me something I can do, some kind of weird chant or meditation that I can do and fix myself.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, that's what I went in, because I think, outside of talking to a therapist when I was a kid, I hadn't seen one. I didn't know much about it, didn't really care, didn't affect me, wasn't part of my life, so I didn't know anything about what therapy was other than what you saw on television. So that was kind of it. It was just, I'm divorced in my early 40s, and now what do I do with my life? How do I figure out what to pick up the pieces and move forward? So if I'm able to get into a relationship again, how can I not repeat the mistakes of the past, was kind of my mentality going in.
Yeah, so you were kind of forced into a position where you thought, I can't be doing this again, like maybe for a third time, or the fear stuff of let me just fix myself, thinking that it would be like a step 1, 2, and 3. Finish.
I was hoping.
Yeah,
I'm like, okay, I'm going to a therapist for 6 months. I'm going to be healed. It's going to be great. And I'm going to go find a new, a new relationship and a better job and blah, blah, blah. And
happy.
Of course, it didn't work out that way, but that was what I thought going in.
Of course. So what was the process then? You obviously stayed in for a while, began to connect the dots around the origin of trauma. I mean, was your therapist a trauma specialist? Because obviously you're going there for relationship support. Or did you end up having, how did that work?
Yeah, I mean, she was trauma informed. Fortunately, I didn't realize at the time what that was or why it was important. Yeah. But she was trauma informed, and so and we didn't start talking about that initially. It wasn't that the main topic. So we started talking about working through relationship books and strategies, and finding myself, and realizing what I'm about, and trying to show me it wasn't all my fault, and the things you normally work through. Sure. So I stayed in there for several. It wasn't. We were doing that for several months, about 6 or 7 months ish, and then of course during a random writing assignment at one point, I had written out that I was a survivor of trauma. Something happened to me when I was a kid, and then she was like, I was reading through a writing assignment during a session, sitting on her couch, and she was like, "Whoa, stop! Wait a minute." So we went back and I read that again, and then we kind of shifted gears and started diving into that, and then we worked on through workbooks like The Courage to Heal, and we started learning DBT skills, and she was doing cognitive behavioral therapy with me, and we were trying to put all the pieces together and go back and revisit those situations and do trauma narratives and all the stuff that you do. And so that was another 1.5 years of going usually twice a week, of just diving into that and trying to figure out what it was and what it was about, and realizing that I'm a survivor. And of course, I always tell people, whenever I talk about it, that one of the most interesting things that happened was after a session, when I was driving home, the therapist had sent me a text, and it was just this little picture, and it just said, "You are a survivor, and that is amazing." And then that was kind of a light bulb moment for me. I'm like, I'm a survivor. Okay, well now I know it's more than like a television show now. I know it's something more in depth. So then that's really what kind of got me interested and focused really on learning what I was a survivor of and how it affected me. And oh my God, all these reasons I'm feeling the way I feel and the struggles I've had, it all goes back to this. And the grooming and the bullying and the self-esteem problems and the lack of fostering relationships and all the things that go through. So it was a therapy for several years, about 2.5, 3 years, of working through various things, to where I finally got to a point where I felt like I had a pretty good understanding of what was going on. I was making great strides. I felt more empowered about myself, and that's when I really kind of took ownership of it. And I was like, okay. So I go and see a therapist once or twice a week, but then the other 5 or 6 days I'm left to my own vices. So I'm like, right. I gotta do something, because I was feeling like isolated and alone because I was alone. I mean, I was single, and so I realized I gotta do something with my mind to occupy my time rather than sitting around feeling sorry for myself. So I started reading books, watching videos, started journaling, and really just kind of started taking my recovery into my own hands and saying, okay, what else can I do? What else can I learn? So I was following people on social media. I started writing more in my journal every day. And then I began to take my journaling onto a blog. And then that's where I started my first blog back in early 2016, very early 2016. To where I put my story out there on the internet, and then from there it just kind of took off. I started writing. I was doing 4 or 5 posts a week about what I'm going through and why do I feel this way, and being a survivor sucks and it's horrible and I don't understand it, and I just tried this new strategy, and yes, it was great, or no, it was horrible, and just it was my life outlined multiple times a week of where I was at then, and then you could slowly see over months that the shift in my writing and my journaling had changed because I was learning new things and experiencing new breakthroughs and understanding like what it meant to be a survivor and why I could finally do things that I never thought I was able to, and try new strategies, and be okay with mindfulness and meditation, and be okay with seeing a therapist and not feeling ashamed, and just all the breakthroughs that were coming through that I was learning more about myself on, it all just clicked. It made sense. And so I felt very empowered using it as a learning experience. And it's not that I was I wasn't a super A student in school. Like, I wasn't somebody who always had this insatiable need to learn. Like, I hated school.
Yeah.
I hated learning. I didn't like to read. So, I would rather watch the movie than read a book. So, but I found it very empowering to learn about myself, to learn about the brain and how the brain is affected by trauma, and what neuro-plasticity was, and how anxiety starts in the brain, and why it starts there, and how, eating disorders and self-esteem, how that gets traced back to childhood trauma, and all these different things that just made sense for me really helped me to understand myself better. And I found that very empowering because it was, I felt like I was more in control of myself and my situation because I was not in control for a long time. I was out of control, and so
because a lot of this showed up for you as anxiety, didn't it? So being anxious within your workplace or within your day-to-day life, right? So before speaking to the therapist, those were some of the symptoms that were coming out. Is that right?
Oh yeah, I was an anxious. Like, I was just a basket case. I was anxious all the time, worrying all the time, chewing on my fingernails, like obsessively compulsive about everything and anything. And so anxiety was a huge part of my life. I lived with it for so long, and I probably knew I was feeling anxious. But I didn't really put the pieces together. I didn't understand why. And so then, I really started diving into anxiety in the brain and different parts of the brain and how how anxiety gets manifested in different parts of your mind and why it happens, and strategies to help keep it under control and to take back your power when there is, when you're in the middle of an anxiety attack or something, or you feel anxiety creeping up or something. And so all these different things that I really just kind of said, okay, I'm going to try and learn as much as I can and figure out why I am the way I am so I can help myself more, so I can feel more empowered, so I don't feel so helpless.
So it sounds like there were two things that sort of supported your recovery, probably lots more, but the two ones jumping out is the educating yourself, so trying to take things into your own hands so that you could practice the tools and skills that were out there to see what worked, and then challenging the shame thing by talking to your therapist and then putting your story out in quite a public space, which is scary. But I wonder if the internet felt safer than talking to somebody face to face, besides the therapist. You know what I mean?
In a way, it kind of did. Mainly because when I first started writing, I was using an alias. So my picture wasn't out there. Okay. I was using a different name. I'm like, I can tell my story. Nobody's really going to care. I mean, it was still a little uneasy when you're talking about childhood sexual abuse and being bullied and all these horrible things. But I felt safe because I was under a pen name. So I was just, nobody knows who I am. I don't know where I live. I don't tell anybody. I'm just, this is who I am. And so it did feel kind of safe that way. Yes. And then, of course, eventually I did kind of come out a little bit more and, shed that alias and use my real name, and which I do now, obviously. But I had to take that baby step of it felt safer to me to use an alias.
Yeah.
And almost writing about, writing stories about somebody who was me, but nobody knew it was me, So that helped a lot because I could not have gone right from just jumping in and using my real name and here I am, world.
No,
I couldn't have done that.
Of course not.
So I needed to do baby steps to get there. And then the other part, of course, is the education. We talk about so much how labels are stigmatized, and you don't want to label somebody, you don't want to judge somebody, which is fine, which is true. But when you can put a name to something, or a definition to something, or a label on something, and this is why I feel anxious, and what does this term mean? Well, things don't seem so scary when you can call it something. For me, it's more of, okay, I've been feeling all these different ways, and I have no idea why. Well, now I know that that's dissociation, and that's a different part of anxiety, and this is part of PTSD and all these different things. So now I'm realizing, now I was realizing that if I can call it something, I can research it more, I can understand it more, and I can figure out a way to work through it. So educating yourself by finding reliable resources, reading books, watching videos, that kind of stuff, it's incredibly helpful because it lets you know that you're not alone, because obviously other people have dealt with it. Yeah. It gives you real world strategies and ideas and ways that you can work through it. It gives you hope that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and that you're not going to be the same way forever. And plus, it's empowering to learn about yourself and to figure out why you are the way you are, so you can take steps to change the things that are in your power to change, and to be okay with things that maybe you can't change.
And so obviously you are in a position now where you have your podcast platform, you're coaching people, your message is really out there of hope and supporting others that have gone through similar things. Looking back on your trauma and the adversity that you faced, it sounds horrific when it has to do with the things you're describing, but do you have some kind of gratitude for that journey that you've been on that's led you to this place of sort of purpose and giving back?
Yes and no. And I think you always have to be careful, because you don't ever want to be, I'm glad I was traumatized, or I'm glad we're not ever happy about that. It's not a good thing.
No.
But I am grateful for the journey that got me here to a point where I can deal with it better. Understanding that it was something that took a long time, and that everybody's journey is different. And for some people, it might take years and years, or it might take decades. Everybody's different. So I'm grateful in that I was able to get to a point where I could learn it and radically accept what happened, and then use it to my advantage to understand myself, to be able to formulate goals and work through strategies in life of things that I can achieve in spite of being a survivor. So in that sense, yeah, I'm glad that I went through the journey that I did in the way that I did, because therapists tried to force me to talk about things in my late teens and 20s that I wasn't ready to go to. So I just shut them down. I'm like, I'm not talking about it. I don't care. It doesn't bother me. So it did bring me to a point where I am able to help people, because I've been through the experience. I understand what it means to be a survivor. I understand where anxiety comes from. I understand, how self-esteem plays in, and, how that affects, you in the ways of eating disorders and the way that you live your daily life and relationships and all the things that I went through. So my lived experience and the education that I still do, helps me to work with others, but it also helps myself, because I'm not there yet. I'm not healed yet. I am a firm believer in healing from a traumatic past is a lifelong journey. So you're always learning about yourself. You're always adapting. There's always going to be some kind of new memory that comes up, or a trigger that happens, or maybe a random flashback here and there, that even if I've got everything under control and things are going fine, something's going to come up eventually based on what happened in the past. And so, but now I'm more readily available to deal with it in a healthy way, and in a way that is understanding and compassionate, and doesn't just have me pushing it aside, like I used to do.
Absolutely. And so, on that point, what sort of habits and routines do you try to put in place for yourself on a good day? Bearing in mind that we all have good days and bad days as far as how this works, but on a good day, what are the things that really support you in maintaining, the place that you've gotten to?
Well, I think for me, one of the biggest things is mindfulness, being fully present, like taking some time here and there to just go stand outside and let the sun hit my face for a couple of minutes, and or listen to the birds, or go out for a little walk. Like mindfulness, going outside, walking, being in nature, those things help me a lot. I do them as often as I can. Music is a big thing. Listening to the music that I like is really inspiring as it is relaxing. So I use music a lot. I play music. I listen to it. The mindfulness, I like to read. And I'm not an avid reader, as in I can read a book in 2 days. Like, it takes me a couple of months to read a book. Yeah. Because I have to read it slowly. I have to go back and reread because I dissociate what I'm reading, and I've got to go back and understand it. So it takes me a while to read, but I enjoy it because when I can get to the last page of that book on my Kindle, I'm like celebrating. I'm like, I just read another book. I learned something. So it's very empowering to learn because I read a lot of self-help books. I don't read a lot for pleasure in the sense of, reading spy novels or fiction or sci-fi or something. It's just not me.
Yeah.
I read more of the self-help, understanding your brain types of books. But that really helps me a lot. Having a safe support system of a handful of people who I trust who know something about me. That, if I'm having a rough day, I can text them or give them a quick call. That's a big part of it. And just being okay with
the support network seems to have been absent from some of your life, whether you pushed them away or whether they weren't there in the first place. It's quite striking. And so it's interesting that you're saying you've got to nurture that support group now because you find it essential for your own sort of well-being and survival.
Yeah, I mean, you have to have a support system. Like, you cannot go through being a trauma survivor alone. Like, it's exponentially more difficult.
Yes.
My first support system outside of a therapist was the internet. I was going on Twitter and I was looking for like chats about mental health and trauma recovery and being a survivor. And so my first support system was virtual. I was typing to people I'd never seen before, but they got me. They understood when I would type something and they would agree with me and they would, yes, I know what that means and I deal with that too. So, you don't have to have a support system of people locally who you can see face to face. I mean, if you can, that's even better. But if you don't have that because of any number of reasons, the support system online is just out there. There are millions of people all over the world who deal with the same thing, the same or similar things that you do. They understand what it means to live through a traumatic past, to have all these problems in your life, to struggle every day. And so there's safety and companionship and feeling like you belong when you can reach out to the support system online. And plus, you can do it from the safety of your own home. You can use whatever name you want. You don't have to reveal yourself and where you live. You just start typing, and this is what I'm feeling, and then people accept you as you are. And so that was a big step. Was the first support system outside of therapy was virtual, and I still rely on that a lot today. I still have friends who I chat with online and support groups and stuff because trying to go through this whole trauma recovery survivor thing alone, it's hard. It's hard enough with people. It's even harder when you have nobody. So, I reach out to that, online. Just reach out because it's there and it's usually free.
Yeah. And it just shows that when we're stuck in our head, that's when we can, it can get really dark and we can torture ourselves in so many other ways than if we let it out in some way. And really interesting to hear the virtual side of things, because there's often criticism around, the digital stuff when it comes to mental health. But really, if it's the bridge that gets you to talking to real people or creating a community sort of down the line, it's absolutely amazing. Do you have any other advice for somebody who might be in the early stages of realizing, that something's not quite right? So they haven't processed some trauma that's gone on in the past, and maybe that's not what they think it is, but they're showing up with anxiety or other kind of compulsions or things like that. What might be the bit of advice or the first steps that they might take?
I think the first thing that I always encourage people to do is, well, first off, reach out for that support, for that support online. Like, that's huge because, there's so many resources on the internet that are free. YouTube videos and, Twitter chats and Facebook groups. So reach out, do a little educating, why do I feel like blank? And then just go start reading. And, that's a huge part. But if you really feel like you're overwhelmed, like, you're just tired of everything the way that's going on, go find yourself a therapist somehow. Therapy is readily accessible now. Coaches are so accessible right now virtually through the internet. There are apps on your smartphone to talk to somebody. There's crisis lines 24/7 through the telephone, through the internet. Find somebody to talk to, virtually or in person, and just get it out. Somebody that's safe, somebody that's knowledgeable, and just realize that, hey, you've been living the same way for your whole life. So Something's got to give. Something's got to change if you want to feel better. So why not take a chance? Because, I think that's kind of where, you get to that breaking point where you're like, I've tried everything, or I feel so horrible, I might as well try this. Well, if you've been doing the same things over and over and you still feel the same, go try something different. Go try talking to somebody. And, even if it doesn't, even if you don't connect with that first person, whether it's a therapist or a coach or whoever, don't give up, because, healing is a lot of trial and error. It's reading books and seeing what resonates with you and what doesn't, trying strategies, working through the thoughts in your head and the feelings, and kind of seeing what resonates with you, what helps you to feel better, what doesn't. And all the while you're learning about yourself and trying to, and seeing who you really are outside of the trauma. And when you do that, it opens up a whole lot of doors, and a whole lot of things are going to come rushing back. So it's important to work with somebody, who is trauma informed, who can help you understand and make sense of those types of feelings when they do start to come out, because eventually they are going to come out. Whether you want it or not, your brain's going to bring things to the forefront of your mind. You're going to be triggered for something. You're going to have a flashback. And so finding somebody to talk with and just being able to say, I need to see it. I need to find somebody. I need to get some help, and not be ashamed about it. Don't feel bad about it. Like, there's no shame in getting help, because ultimately you've got one life on this earth to live, and why not go enjoy it and live it and learn it? And if you spent the first half of your life being miserable, alone, and struggling, well, now you have the second half, and start taking steps to feel better about yourself and to be more empowered and to take opportunities as they come, instead of just letting them pass you by because you think you'll fail, or because you're doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. So the biggest thing is, talk to somebody, utilize the free support systems. That's the first step. Just go on Google and type in the way you feel and see what comes up. There are countless articles and resources. Go use it, because that's in this day and age, with help so readily available, it's really just so key to be able to take that step of reaching out, not being ashamed of what's happened to you, and realize that if it happened to you, it's happened to countless other people. Like, you're not the only person in the world who's been through traumas A, B, and C.
Yeah.
You feel like you are, but in reality, you're not.
Yeah. When you're in it, you feel like you're the only one, don't you? There's so much wisdom here. There's so many good ideas, and such a profound point to just take that first step, whether it's virtual or with a therapist. So tell us just a little bit about your work, what you do, and let people know where they can find you.
Yeah. So, I do, most of my clients I work with are virtual. So we do Skype or video chat, or talk on the phone. Yeah. And, I specialize in helping people overcome anxiety in their life. Why do I feel this way? Where is it coming from? How can I take steps to feel more empowered? Taking care of myself. And, I have a program, that kind of starts you with understanding anxiety in your life, understanding the past and what happened, but taking you right now where you're at. Okay, I'm right here in my life. Where can I move forward? What do I want to do with my life? Let's put steps in place to get there, understanding how all this stuff over here helped or affected us in some way. So, we take positive steps forward with the understanding of how the past affects you. And then, we put in place things that you can do on a daily basis to help you overcome all those negative feelings and things that are holding you back. And so that's a big part of what I do. Like I said, one-on-one and then group coaching, where we have a new initiative where we are having calls every single day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, for 45 minutes, where you can join through your smartphone, through your telephone, through your computer. Yeah. And it's very low price, very, very, very affordable, low priced, easily accessible. We have one call now that starts at 8 p.m. Eastern. We're soon going to be launching one in the middle of the afternoon for people in the UK and in Europe, where it's a bit more on their time. Yeah. So it's not quite in the middle of the night, kind of thing. So, but where we do like coaching every single day, where you bring questions and comments, and we talk about anxiety and food issues and how trauma affects the brain, and overcoming a narcissistic relationship, and all these different types of things, self-esteem. And so that's an initiative we started just this past spring, which is going really well. And it's really just nobody else is doing it the way that we're doing it, or really doing it at all, I don't think. So we are excited about that, but you can learn more about that on my website, beyondyourpast.com. There's links there. There's contact forms, there's podcasts for my show that you can listen to. And really just, if you're curious, just search Beyond Your Past on Google. You'll find me on Twitter, Instagram, and of course my website and Facebook. Just reach out, connect. And I'd love to, get in contact with you. And if you're interested in learning more about me as a coach or whatever, just hit me up and I'll be happy to talk with you.
Sounds amazing. I'm so impressed with everything that you do. I resonate so much with your story, and even though my background was very different, it just pulls together that sometimes we can make choices and educate ourselves in order to move our lives forward, but also that it's an ongoing struggle. It's not like a beautiful, it was hard and now we're fixed and everything's perfect. And that's definitely the message I want to get across is, even if people are doing great things in the world, we've got to put in habits and routines to look after ourselves, to continue to educate ourselves. And for me, I need that circle of people, right? So no matter how great life is or how perfect it is, if I don't have that circle of people, I could just tip, over the edge. Not in the same way as before, because I've got more sort of education and ways to do it, but challenging the shame every day, getting out of our comfort zone, connecting with people. And then it's so beautiful to see how this has turned into your purpose as well, and how many people you're helping. Thank you, Matt, so much for your time, and I know we're going to stay in touch. We'll put all that information into the show notes. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, Petra. It's my pleasure. Thanks for being here, and I look forward to having you on my show as well. So.
Can't wait. I'm there. All right. Thank you.
Yep.